Imagine a scenario for a second. Someone you know is using a weapon against you. But this weapon, it leaves absolutely zero visible marks. It requires zero physical effort to wield. And yet, if it is used effectively, it can make you, the victim, look like the one who is completely losing their mind. It is sort of the ultimate bait and switch. I mean, you are left holding the bag, looking erratic, while the other person has not even lifted a finger. And when we slow down, really look at it, that weapon is silence. Just absolute suffocating quiet. In the next few minutes, you are going to hear something that sounds unbelievable, but brain scans show it is entirely true. Your brain cannot tell the difference between getting physically hit and being completely ignored. You will hear about an experiment where total strangers excluded someone from a meaningless digital ball game for 2 minutes, and the pain centers in their brain lit up like a Christmas tree. You will hear why couples trapped in one specific pattern of silence face an 80% chance of divorce within 4 or 5 years. And you will hear why teenagers who endure this from a parent are 3 times more likely to attempt suicide. Because relationship researchers and trauma experts are increasingly pointing out that this particular manipulation tactic can actually be more damaging than yelling. This is weaponized silence. And once you understand the mechanics of this, you realize it is not just an absence of words. It is a highly active behavior. I mean, silence is a choice. So let us start with a vital distinction right out of the gate. If you get overwhelmed in an argument and you just need, 10 minutes to take a walk and cool down, are you accidentally being toxic? Because just being quiet is not inherently a bad thing, right? No, not at all. Silence itself is complete neutral. It is entirely about how it is deployed. When we look at the psychology of communication, experts generally break silence down into 3 distinct categories. The first one is exactly that, simply needing space. This is completely healthy. It is honest, and it usually has a clear time limit, like, I will be back in an hour. You communicate an intention to return. You are saying, I'm too upset, let's talk later. You are managing your own emotions. You are not trying to manipulate someone else's. You're just putting a bookmark in the conversation. But then we move to the second category, and relationship researchers like John Gottman, they call this stonewalling. Now, this is unhealthy, but it is really crucial to understand that it is not malicious. It feels malicious when it happens, but stonewalling happens when a person becomes so emotionally overwhelmed that their nervous system basically just goes into overdrive. It is like a circuit breaker tripping. The clinical term Gottman uses is being flooded. Their heart rate spikes, adrenaline is pumping, and their brain just shuts down to protect itself. And they literally cannot process the conversation anymore. They go completely blank and silent. And it definitely still hurts the person on the receiving end, because it is incredibly frustrating to talk to a brick wall. But the stonewaller is not trying to punish anyone. They're just surviving the moment. They are throwing up a shield, not swinging a sword. But then we get to the third category, and this is the real focus: weaponized silence, or what is often called the silent treatment. This crosses the line into emotional abuse. It is purposeful, it is planned, there is no time limit, and it is specifically designed to punish or destabilize or control you. It sounds like the difference between a player calling a legitimate timeout so everyone can catch their breath versus a player just taking the ball and walking off the field to ruin the game for everyone else. The crucial dividing lines here are intent and patterns. Like, what is the person trying to do? Are they trying to make you doubt yourself? Are they trying to pressure you into giving in by withdrawing their affection? And, did this happen repeatedly? If the answer is yes, you are not dealing with a communication issue. You are dealing with a weapon. Which brings us to the part of this topic that genuinely threw me for a loop, because now that we know what weaponized silence is, we have to look at why we react to it so strongly. I just assumed it was, annoying or frustrating. But the research moves from behavioral psychology straight into hard neuroscience. Is it actually true that the brain cannot tell the difference between getting physically hit and being completely ignored? It sounds unbelievable, I know, but brain scans show us it is entirely true. There is extensive research from Dr. Kipling Williams, who has studied ostracism, which is the formal term for being excluded or ignored. He studied this for decades. He runs a whole laboratory at Purdue University, just focused on this. And when a person is ignored, brain scans show that a specific region called the anterior cingulate cortex lights up. For those of us who have not taken an anatomy class in a while, that is the exact same region of the brain that registers physical pain. It is the alarm bell for bodily injury. So your brain processes the social rejection of silence using the very same neural pathways it uses to process like a broken bone or a severe burn. The pain is not a metaphor. It is a physiological reality. But how did they even test that? I mean, you cannot just put someone in an MRI machine and tell their friends to stop talking to them. Well, actually, they found a way to do exactly that, but with a really clever workaround. It is a classic study in psychology. It is called the cyberball experiment, and it is incredibly simple. Subjects are placed in an MRI machine and given a screen where they play this rudimentary digital ball tossing game. And they believe they are playing with two other real people in different rooms, just passing a virtual ball back and forth. And at first, the three little avatars toss the ball equally. But then the system is programmed so the other two players simply stop throwing the ball to the subject. They just pass it back and forth to each other, completely excluding the person in the scanner. So the subject is just lying there in this tube, watching this little digital ball bypass them, knowing they are being left out. And within just 2 to 3 minutes, literally minutes, the subjects report genuine, measurable distress. And keep in mind, this is a meaningless computer game. They are playing with complete strangers they have never met and will never meet. And yet, the pain centers in their brain light up like a Christmas tree, just from a few minutes of being left out by strangers on a screen. Williams' research found that being ignored like this simultaneously attacks 4 basic human needs: your need for belonging, your self-esteem, your sense of control, and your sense of having a meaningful existence. Weaponized silence hits all 4 targets at exactly the same time. You feel disconnected, worthless, powerless, and completely invisible. You know, it makes me think about how a physical bruise, it eventually heals and fades from your memory. But this kind of social pain is almost like a psychological phantom limb. The actual incident is over, the silence has ended, but the brain keeps generating the pain. The data notes that people can re-experience the intense sting of being socially excluded years later just by remembering it. You do not physically feel a healed sprained ankle when you think about it, but you definitely feel the gut punch of being frozen out by someone you love. What is fascinating here is the evolutionary context. Why does our brain overreact so intensely to being ignored? Why did we evolve to feel a lack of text messages as physical agony? It seems like an overreaction. But think about our ancestors. For thousands of years, human survival depended entirely on the group. We lived in hunter-gatherer tribes. We could not hunt or forage or protect ourselves alone. So if the group ignores you, it means you are being cast out. And in a prehistoric environment, being cast out meant certain death. You would starve or be eaten. So your brain evolved to treat ostracism as a literal life or death emergency. The anterior cingulate cortex fires off that pain signal to force you to get back in the group's good graces, to literally save your life. Today, obviously, we do not live in huge tribes. We have much smaller support systems. So when you are cut off by the 1 or 2 people you rely on, like a partner, a parent, a best friend, that evolutionary alarm bell rings with terrifying intensity. Here is where it gets really interesting, because understanding this immense biological pain leads directly to understanding why abusers choose this specific tool over, say, screaming and yelling. It is not an accident. They are not just, lacking communication skills. It is a highly calculated choice to trigger that exact survival panic. When you look at the psychology of manipulation, abusers use silence to accomplish a few distinct goals without ever having to raise their voice or lift a finger. First, they use it to dodge responsibility. If someone hurts you and then refuses to speak, they never have to admit they were wrong. They effectively blockade any fair resolution. The conflict is just frozen on their terms. Second, it is used to ignore boundaries. Let us say you ask your partner for respect on a certain issue and they respond by going completely cold and silent for 3 days. The hidden unspoken message is, you stepped out of line by asking for respect and now you are being punished. It trains the victim to never assert a boundary again because the punishment of the silence is worse than whatever boundary they were trying to set in the first place. But the most insidious use of this weapon is something psychologists observe constantly in abusive dynamics. They use silence to try to make you lose your cool. This is the cruel twist of it all. It is like someone who stops moving their pieces in a rigged game of chess. They just sit back, watch. You start knocking over the board, trying to figure out how to keep the game going, and then they calmly turn to the referee and say, look, I am just sitting here quietly. They are the one throwing a tantrum. The abuser goes quiet and just waits. They know the silence is triggering that anterior cingulate cortex pain in your brain. They know your evolutionary survival instinct is screaming at you to fix the connection. So you start to panic. You get anxious. Your heart is racing. You send one text, then another, then a long paragraph begging for a response, pleading to know what you did wrong. And then the trap snaps shut. The abuser points to those desperate, frantic messages and says, see, I am the calm, mature one here. You are hysterical. You are harassing me. They trigger your biological survival instinct, and then they penalize you for trying to survive. And the physical toll this takes on the victim is immense. I was reading through the work of Bessel van der Kolk. He is a prominent trauma researcher who focuses on how trauma affects the physical body. And this kind of emotional control does not just stay in your head. It fundamentally alters your physiology. We really have to talk about the physical symptoms because they are severe. When you are subjected to weaponized silence, your brain triggers a massive stress response. Your body just gets flooded with cortisol, the stress hormone, because it thinks you're being kicked out of the tribe and you are going to die. And when your body is constantly flooded with cortisol, it stays in a chronic fight or flight state. Your nervous system is on high alert. The vagus nerve, which connects your brain to your gut, it starts sending panic signals to your digestive system. That is exactly why people who endure long silent treatments report chronic stomach problems and irritable bowel syndrome, severe migraines and insomnia. Your body is literally breaking down because it believes it is under constant invisible attack. It is horrifying when you put it like that. Your own biology is basically weaponized against you. And this brings us to a really uncomfortable reality, how widespread this is. This is not some rare psychological phenomenon happening in dark corners. It is happening in our living rooms, in our offices, and constantly on our phones. Let us start with romantic relationships because this is where it shows up the most frequently. John Gottman's research identifies a very specific, highly destructive loop. He calls it the demand-withdrawal pattern. One partner pushes to resolve an issue, they demand a conversation, and the other completely shuts down and withdraws into silence. And the statistics on this are completely sobering. Gottman's research on thousands of couples shows that if a couple is stuck in this demand-withdrawal loop in the first few years of marriage, they face an 80% chance of getting divorced within 4 or 5 years. 80%. It is an absolute relationship killer because it destroys the fundamental trust required for intimacy. There was a case study from a clinical therapist about a successful product manager. We will call her Casey. She is a highly competent adult, manages large teams, solves complex problems all day, but she grew up with a parent who used silence as a form of punishment. Now, in her 30s, when her partner goes quiet during a disagreement, she says she instantly feels 4 years old again. She loses all her executive function. Her brain is flashing back to that original childhood terror of being abandoned. She recounted sitting at her kitchen table at 11 p.m. after 3 days of silence from her partner, drafting this long, desperate apology text for an argument she did not even start, taking all the blame just to make the crushing silence stop. That perfectly transitions into the generational cycle of this. When we look at parents and children, the damage is even more severe, because adults at least have the vocabulary to know something is wrong. Kids do not. When a parent gives a child the silent treatment, the child does not have the cognitive ability or the lived experience to understand the complex dynamics at play. They do not think, oh, my parent is emotionally immature and lacks conflict resolution skills. Children are inherently egocentric. They believe everything happens because of them. So when a parent freezes them out, they internalize one terrifying, deeply rooted belief. I am fundamentally worthless and I am unlovable. There is a story from a woman in Australia documented in the research. When she was just 5 years old, her mother would get angry, give her a specific look, and then refuse to speak to her or even acknowledge her presence in the room for days at a time. She was basically a ghost in her own house. As a teenager, she would end up in tears, begging on the floor for her mother to just look at her. And the true tragedy of that generational trauma is that it replicates itself. That same woman went to couples counselling years later and realised with utter horror that she was doing the exact same thing to her own husband. She did not know any other way to handle conflict. The weapon was passed down seamlessly. The medical community is finally treating this with the severity it deserves. Pediatric groups like the American Academy of Pediatrics now classify deliberate coldness and the silent treatment as a form of psychological maltreatment. It is categorized as an act of omission, meaning the harm is done by what a parent intentionally withholds rather than what they actively do. And the fallout is measurable. A 2025 study found that teenagers who reported enduring this kind of emotional abuse and withholding from a parent were 3 times more likely to attempt suicide. 3 times. It completely destroys a child's internal foundation. And yet, despite how damaging we know this to be, this tactic has become so normalized in our modern culture that we have actually invented a cute, trendy little word for it in the dating world. Ghosting. And I want to ask you to think about your own life right now. Have you ever been ghosted? Better yet, have you ever ghosted someone else? Because statistically speaking, you probably have. The data shows that between 50 and 65% of young adults have ghosted someone. Ghosting is basically the modern digital silent treatment. You're talking to someone, maybe you've been on a few dates, maybe you've been texting for weeks and suddenly nothing. No goodbye. No explanation, just a digital void. It makes complete sense why ghosting is so agonizing. It is like a cliffhanger in a movie, but the sequel never gets made. Your brain is desperately searching for an ending, a resolution that simply does not exist. You are left trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces. That lack of closure is precisely what makes it so psychologically damaging. There is a fascinating 2024 study by researcher Gilly Friedman that looked directly at the impact of ghosting. She found that it causes severe lingering self-doubt. People who are ghosted feel a massive threat to those basic needs we talked about earlier: control, self-esteem, belonging. And her research explicitly shows that ghosting often hurts worse than a normal confrontational breakup. People would rather be yelled at or formally dumped, because with a normal breakup, even if it is messy or mean, you have an answer. You have a cognitive schema for what happened. The relationship ended because of X, Y, or Z. You have the data. With ghosting, you have zero data. Your brain stays in high alert mode indefinitely, constantly scanning your own past behavior, trying to figure out what you did wrong to cause this person to just evaporate. It is the ambiguity that kills you. And we also see this weapon wielded not just by individuals in dating apps or marriages, but by entire communities as a way to enforce conformity. Religious shunning is probably the most extreme example of this. The Amish refer to it as maiding. Jehovah's Witnesses practice disfellowshipping. If you break the rules of those high control groups, you are completely cut off. And research highlights that for members of these communities, their entire social, economic, and familial world is inside the congregation. So you lose everything. Being shunned means losing your parents, your siblings, your lifelong friends, your business network, all in the exact same day. You literally become dead to everyone you have ever known. It is unparalleled psychological distress. Sociologists who study these groups describe it as a type of solitary confinement. It is just carried out in plain sight. It is devastating. But here is the silver lining in all of this research. People are finally waking up to how damaging this dynamic is. If you go on social media platforms, places like TikTok or forums like Quora, they are flooded with people who did not even know this behavior had a name until they were well into adulthood. They just thought they were crazy or too needy. But now you constantly see survivors finding each other and repeating this exact phrase. No response is a response. That realization is incredibly powerful. The public is slowly developing the vocabulary to identify this abuse. So if we know how the mechanism works, we know it attacks the pain centers of the brain, floods the body with cortisol, and destroys our sense of self. We have to talk about the cure. How do you get out of this trap or ensure you are not accidentally setting it yourself? Disarming the weapon starts with properly diagnosing the situation. You have to look at the pattern. If someone goes quiet and it is a one-time thing, or they are clearly just flooded and not trying to abuse you, the best approach is to calmly name it. You can say, I notice you are not responding to me right now. I know you are upset. I want to fix this. Can we talk? You acknowledge their feelings and you invite a conversation. You offer an olive branch, but, and this is critical, if they still refuse to talk, you must not chase them. You give them space, but you absolutely refuse to take the blame for their inability to communicate. But what if it is a repeated weapon? What if you are dealing with a partner or a parent who uses silence every single time you disagree? Then the rules of engagement completely change. You must recognize the pattern for what it is. It is not just how they are. It is not a quirk. It is a calculated tactic of emotional abuse. And the most important thing you can do is stop chasing. Stop the texts. Stop over-apologizing for things you did not do. Stop sending those desperate paragraphs, because chasing rewards the tactic. It proves to the abuser that the silence is working. It gives them exactly the panic reaction they are demanding. You have to short-circuit the loop. You set a firm boundary. You say calmly and without anger, I am happy to talk when we are both ready to speak respectfully. I will not beg you to talk to me, and you leave it at that. You remove your energy from their game. However, there is a crucial warning we must emphasize from the trauma research. Domestic violence organizations explicitly do not recommend couples counseling when emotional abuse like weaponized silence is present. That seems counterintuitive. Would not therapy be the exact place to fix a communication issue? In a healthy relationship, yes. But in an abusive dynamic, the problem is not a relationship communication issue. The problem is the abuser's desire for control. Couples counseling requires vulnerability and honesty to work. An abuser will simply take whatever vulnerabilities you expose in the therapist's office and use them as ammunition the next time they give you the silent treatment. The abuser is the problem, not the relationship itself. You cannot therapy your way out of someone else's need to control you. That is a really sobering but deeply important distinction. And there is another powerful insight from those survivor stories online. Victims often hit this incredible aha moment. They realize that they can use the abuser's silence as an opportunity. They realize the silence is actually an exit door. It is a brilliant reclaiming of power. When the abuser goes quiet to punish them, intending to wait for the victim to break down and apologize, the victim uses that exact window of silence to walk away entirely, to pack their things or block the person's number and just go. No contact. They turn the weapon into a shield. They use the space the abuser created to escape. So what does this all mean? I think the real power move here is naming it. As long as you classify it as them just being quiet, you feel crazy. You are constantly guessing, turning your own behavior inside out, trying to figure out what you did wrong. But the second you label it weaponized silence, you take its invisibility cloak away. You realize it is a manipulation tactic, not a reflection of your worth. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the core power source of weaponized silence is isolation. It works by making you feel completely alone and disconnected. Therefore, the ultimate antidote to silence is connection. Telling the truth about what is happening to a friend, to a therapist, to a support group. Our connection disarms the isolation. And obviously, we all need to look in the mirror a bit too, because these patterns get passed down so easily. If you find yourself using silence against someone, ask yourself a hard question. Are you genuinely taking space to calm down, or are you secretly trying to punish them? Are you waiting to see them squirm? And if you just need space, you have a responsibility to communicate that. Give a time limit, say I need an hour, and then we will talk. And always close the loop, come back. Silence without a follow-up conversation turns into a weapon very quickly. Because comfortable silence between loved ones, like sitting in a room, reading together, driving without having to fill the air with chatter, that is a beautiful gift. It is the sign of a secure connection. Silence is just a tool. It can build or it can destroy. When it is used to hold space for someone, it is a genuine comfort. But when it is used to erase someone, to make them feel invisible, it becomes a cage. And as the survivors noted so beautifully, healing begins simply by telling the truth about what happened. You step out of the cage the moment you name it for what it is. Live in a world where we are more connected than at any point in human history. We literally carry the ability to instantly speak to anyone, anywhere, right in our pockets. But ask yourself, does all this instant connectivity actually make the weapon of silence more powerful than ever before? When our baseline expectation is an immediate reply, a constant glowing stream of digital connection, does the quiet hurt just a little bit more? Remember, this weapon leaves 0 visible marks. But just because you cannot see the injury does not mean the damage is not real.